now, I've been tasting it throughout the show, and I'm delighted now to be joined by Molly Kinglsey, who's founder of Us For Them, who campaigned against school closures during the pandemic. Now, as I've said, this is about a Telegraph story talking about how the Counter-Disinformation Unit, that's the government's unit, looking into people who were perhaps critical or sceptical of lockdown, spied on people like Molly. Now, you must have been quite shocked to have discovered that you'd been spied on, although did you have your suspicions that there was monitoring of your social media activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time we found out, it really wasn't a surprise. It was obvious, really, for quite a while, particularly during 2021.
In what way, though? Did you feel that messages weren't getting the...
Yeah, there was no traction. And I mean, the first point is it wasn't just me. I mean, there was quite a big group of us, I think, who became aware, not just from Us For Them, actually, but, you know, a group of kind of dissident journalists and outspoken critics who...
I might have been in that group.
I suspect you might have.
Professor Carl Hennigan would have been another. Anyone sort of voicing any concerns about the efficacy of face masks over mass vaccination of children, and not, by the way, in a conspiracy theory way, just saying, is it right that we're vaccinating 9-year-olds? Equally, people who were talking about whether schools should be closed at all. I mean, these are people with perfectly valid opinions. We're not talking about extremists here sending out anti-vax messages.
No, we're not. And actually, it's really interesting that you use that word extreme, because actually what I would say is that many of us were arguing really for the moderate position. So, you know, before 2020, if you had talked about isolating children by themselves for weeks on end, if you talked about, you know, masking children for 8 hours, each day, including in lessons. And if you talked about giving children, you know, a novel medical intervention when there was no real benefit for many of those children, well, actually, that would have been considered an extreme position. Yeah. And what I feel we were doing, you know, my Us For Them colleagues were saying, whoa, you know, no, like this isn't right. The reasonable position here is to challenge, yes, is to ask for the evidence, and is to say, you know, have harms been considered? And actually, it was that view that I think we're seeing was, well, we know it was being spied on, and I think we can infer that there must have been some suppression. I mean, we know that. So our Facebook group, our Us For Them Facebook group, quite frequently had warnings slapped on it saying, you know, you are circulating, you're letting false information into the group. One example was we posted a Daily Mail article. So this is an article that had been in mainstream, and the article had been about masking children and a potential link between carbon dioxide levels, yes, and face masks on kids. And we'd shared that, and we'd had a warning slapped on the group saying, you know, your group is in danger of being lost, your group's being suppressed, which means other members won't see it. So, you know, we know that kind of suppression took place. Likewise, on Twitter, I think many of us felt it was very odd that we were saying things that were having an awful lot of traction, it looked like. So, you know, tweets that were being retweeted maybe hundreds of times, and yet follower numbers never went up. It was very weird.
I mean, we're used to kind of seeing dissent on Twitter because I would suggest that it's probably largely left-leaning, and the left seem to go with full lockdown on steroids, and people who are more of a conservative stroke right-wing persuasion were talking a bit more about, you know, civil liberties and all of these concerns. The government, it should be stressed, is denying that social media posts were doctored, deleted, or indeed, I think the word is shadow banned. But it is quite sinister to know that social media companies collaborated with the government over monitoring.
Yes, it is sinister. And I think, you know, although many of us knew it would happen, you know, when I saw the list, so in fact, I've got it here, I don't know if it's picked up on the camera, but you can see it's pages long. And this was mainly...
Is that the organisations that were monitored?
This was just me. So this was just my comments, most of which were either in mainstream press or articles, some of them on Twitter. And, you know, this is just one journalist, and it's not even like I have a huge profile compared to many who would have been monitored. And I think what strikes me about this is it's like what we found out, and what the Telegraph piece yesterday found out, was probably the tip of this vast iceberg. We only know this because a few of us submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, essentially.
And you, subject access requests. Yeah. You wanted to find out how much data the government held on you individually. What did you find out on that?
Well, this is what you found out.
Just your whole list of all references.
And if you look, and I've circled a few. And
so it's all sorts of comments that you've made about schools are overacting to the COVID risk. That was a Telegraph article that you wrote. You're flagging, concerns over face masks, whether they work or not. I mean, there's nothing particularly controversial here.
Well, a lot of it is unpalatable opinions. You know, some of it, I'd say, is fact. So on some occasions, and actually one of my directors, I mean, this is just brilliant. One of my directors got flagged. I'm just going to read this out, actually, because I think it's really interesting. She says she had been contacted by parents from more than 100 schools. So that's a fact. It was in an article reported in The Telegraph. And Arabella Skin and my colleague had said, parents are totally distraught that their children's schools have decided they will continue with masks in class with no end in sight. This was in 2022.
Yes.
So this was fact, and it was a strong opinion from one of my directors. And actually what the government is flagging here, or what this unit is flagging, is opinions which are unpalatable. You know, this isn't misinformation.
No, also, this is pretty innocuous. Molly Kinglsey says it is indefensible that children's lives are still not back to normal when the rest of society is. She urges ministers to make a clear statement that children's extracurricular activities should not be subject to additional curbs.
Have you seen the date?
That's no. That is the 6th of the 2nd, 2022.
So, you know, this is kids' lives had been disrupted by two years. I know, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Are you going to take any action over this? What position are you in with regard to sort of holding the government to account on this? You could recommend perhaps that Baroness Hallett investigates the counter-disinformation unit as part of the COVID inquiry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think she has to. And I think the problem with this is you can't undo censorship. And I'm afraid the stark reality is that for the best part of 2 years, you know, we have been living under this condition where one narrative appears to have been being amplified. So, you know, that's a separate issue. But we know that certain news outlets, including the BBC, as you said, have taken a very pro-lockdown view, not platforming people perhaps who are dissenters.
Bearing in mind as well that the BBC had a role in this counter-disinformation unit forum. What do you make of that the state broadcaster is involved in this? Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? And it's sinister. I think this is where it all gets very, very murky. And I think Hallett does need to investigate this. I think there must be accountability. The first thing is we actually don't really know. You know, we're guessing really, aren't we? You know, we can see we were spied on, but as to how much that translated, if at all, into actual censorship, we don't know. We need to understand that. We also need to understand, I think, who within government sanction this. I mean, I find it quite incredible to think that this wasn't sanctioned at ministerial level. Surely it must have been.
Yes.
But I don't think we've yet heard a minister come out and said, you know, this was my brainchild.
No.
Someone needs to explain. And I think only when we have the full facts can we work out what to do about it. But it does seem to me that on its face, this is absolutely anathema to the principles of liberal democracy and free speech. I mean, what is going on here?
Just in terms of your personal life and the impact on your family, what has being a lockdown skeptic done for you? I appreciate that you've made some friends on that kind of fringe of the debate, but equally, I know that you've endured a lot of abuse on social media and it can't have been easy.
No, I mean, it's been probably both the most sort of overwhelmingly amazing and also incredibly stressful experience of my life. I mean, in a way, it has been an enormous privilege. Like, I think that is how I see it. And you know, I've always thought, like, I am a mum, speaking up parents, speaking up for kids. I'm, you know, also, I guess now a journalist, but actually speaking on behalf of so many parents. So, you know, there's been that whole aspect of it and just bringing together this network of thousands of parents, all of whom just felt something had gone so wrong for children's welfare. So that has been amazing. I think at times it has been unbearably stressful. I think during 2021, particularly with the kids' vaccine rollout, I was very, very aware that it felt like something was very wrong about that. The government process with the JCVI was extremely unorthodox, and it was really horrid being in the middle of that.
I mean, the government would counteract that argument by saying, look, yes, it was accelerated, but all of the right protocols are followed. Many children have been safely vaccinated, etc., etc. Just in regard to this particular story, to sort of conclude, what do you think has been the effect of lockdown on children? There was an interesting article in The Spectator, I think, written by Mary Wakefield in the week, talking about increased levels of anxiety and depression. I think we can also put that down to perhaps the proliferation of social media. But in general, how do you think children are faring after being that COVID generation?
I think it really depends on the child. I mean, look, some children will have bounced back, I'm sure, are absolutely fine. I think we know that there are many children who are not fine. I mean, we know children lost their lives, you know, behind closed doors, all the safeguarding risks. So I don't think it's possible to give like a kind of cookie cutter answer. I do think you have identified one of the key worries that many of us have coming out of the whole lockdown period, which is actually when you put children behind a screen and you normalise that for the best part of a year and a half, 2 years, we've set up a really nasty trend and a kind of normalisation that actually school and teachers and actually socialisation can be replaced with a screen. So I think many of us leave this period very worried about that.
And final thought, it's amazing, isn't it? And it's thanks to campaigners like you that children have actually been included in Baroness Hallett's inquiry, because initially they weren't even going to look at children.
I know.
Look at the reaction and the result on adults.
The terms of reference didn't mention the word children once, and that just tells you all you need to know about what goes wrong for policy making for kids in this country.
Molly Kinglsey, thank you very much for coming in and discussing all this and for sharing that paperwork with us. It's fascinating stuff.